So, like the title of the video says, we're going to be covering Hydroid's final ability in my series. I am sorry it has taken so long. Hopefully I can be a lot more consistent going forward and we can get back on track here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the card for Undertow. Now this is a pretty cool ability that is limited in a lot of ways. Now what it can do, it's pretty decent at. What it can't do, is most of the fast-paced Warframe things. Now, that being said, Undertow has its place, and it can be extremely strong for a couple of reasons. So let's go ahead and get into what Undertow is, and at the very end of the video, I'll cover what it's good for and sort of how you can use it. So again, like if you don't like all of the testing and the showing in the middle of how everything works, we can just skip all that. You guys can jump to the end and get what you really want. So getting into the ability itself now, let's go ahead and talk about all of its card stats. So we have Drain, that's when you use the ability, so it costs 15 when you use it. It's pretty cheap to just start off with, but there's a lot of other energy costs associated with it, so that makes sense. Grab energy is 5. That's per time you grab an enemy. Now you have basically a tentacle you can extend out of this puddle, and it will grab an enemy and pull them into it. You have energy cost per second. I believe they changed this, so now it's no longer a cost per enemy per second, it's just a cost per second. This is a pretty decent buff. I don't remember when they changed this. I just noticed you don't really have an increased cost, at least up to quite a few enemies. So that's really nice. And then you also have an energy cost per distance moved. Now, this is a little different. From what I can tell, there's no like distance you can move where you don't really have a cost. That's why it's so low. The energy cost per section of movement isn't that much, but it's pretty easy to reduce, as we're going to see how the formula works here in a second. Now, getting past the energy stuff, let's go ahead and talk about radius. We have 4 meters radius, and another distance figure is the grab range. So there's 2 range stats for this ability, and that is how big the puddle is and how far your tentacles reach out to grab people. Now, when this happens, just because of the way they coded it, ability range is a little bit wonky. Energy costs are a little bit wonky. Damage per second is a little bit more straightforward, but it's pretty complicated. So this skill it has a lot going on. So you're gonna have to really figure out exactly what you want out of the skill to really utilize it properly. Next, we're going on to damage. It deals 25 flat damage per second. Now I'm not 100% sure if that damage, that 25, repeats, but it's really inconsequential no matter what. That 25 damage isn't going to matter unless you're fighting like level 1 enemies, and even if you are, you won't be for long. You're gonna scale way past that, and you know, if it's not 1,000 damage at least, it doesn't super matter. So moving past that, you do have the damage increase per second. Now that 2% increase is really nice because it stacks perpetually and it is impact type. So what that means is it's going to be really bad against armored units, and it's going to be really good against shielded units, and pretty decent against infested units. Now that being said, that 2% does increase every second. So what you're going to see is it's going to do 2% on the first tick, and then that's going to double to 4%, and then it's going to go up again to 6% of their total health, and then 8%, 10%, and it keeps stacking perpetually. So what this means is if we can stack this percentage higher, it's going to be able to kill enemies regardless of their HP faster, right? So it doesn't really matter. The only thing that really affects this, much like a lot of other people's abilities, is going to be armor damage reduction, and it does affect it a lot. So let's go ahead and look at this ability and what it kind of is and how it works before we start getting into a lot of the numbers. So let's go ahead and use the ability, and you're going to see we drop into a puddle. Now your energy color is going to affect these little specks that you see in the puddle. So if we change our energy color, you're going to notice it changes to something else. So now you can see it's more of a blue color. Additionally, if you have the augment that modifies, sorry about that, that's my Steam if you can hear that. If you have the ability that modifies, or the augment that modifies your Undertow, you're going to see an effect actually rise above your puddle. and it's going to have little wispiness. It's pretty awesome, actually. I really like that they did that. It kind of immediately will show you, hey, this person has this augment, and it'll make it more visible. Because when you're a puddle, it's kind of hard to see you anyway. So if you're trying to do more of a support setup, this is going to help you do it just through the visual itself, not even necessarily the effect. So I just wanted to kind of point that out as we're going through kind of what it is and how it works. I'm going to spawn a couple enemies real quick, and we're going to see what the puddle actually does to people. So whenever you use the puddle, you see you have kind of a boundary on the outside. As you move closer, you'll see enemies fall in and begin drowning. They'll take that damage over time, over and over, until they die. Now, it is percentage based, so if you're fighting lower level things, the numbers are gonna be smaller. Now, if an enemy is far away, instead of moving, you know, and using up potentially, look in the bottom right, how much energy I'm using just by moving this much, you can have a one-time cost to grab somebody. A lot of the time, that's gonna be worth it. And you pull them directly towards the center of the puddle, so they start taking damage and eventually they die. Now, that being said, if I grab another enemy and I move away, they're actually freeze framed where you grabbed them from. So if I move away fast enough, you're actually going to see them pop up over there, right? And this is also true if you just move in and move out. Enemies actually retain their current positions when you do this, all right? Now, what's weird about this is there's a bit more to the story than just that. So let me go grab some energy real quick, and we're going to talk about how your abilities interact with each other while moving in the puddle. So when you go into the puddle, you can't roll. It brings you out of it. When you go into the puddle, you can't jump. You can't bullet jump. You know, we've been kind of through this. Before, certain abilities, especially when they're movement based, just don't allow for, you know, normal Warframe movements. However, you can still use your Tidal Surge ability, where you kind of like shoot across the screen. So, if we go into our puddle, and we grab this little guy, and then I dash over here, it's actually going to bring him with us. Now notice, he died, but he was where we left him. He was where we picked him up. So if I go down, looks like I've used up all my energy again. Whenever I pick up an enemy, it will remember where they were in basically relative space to where I am. So if I pick him up on the top right, and then I dash in a direction, he's going to always be on my top right. There he is. Now if I did on the left, right, up, down, etc., if he was in the middle, this is also the same. Now, a little bit of wonkiness that comes into this, though, is when we go into a puddle, and then I dash into enemies. So now these enemies are with me, except they're not. They got knocked back. So there's definitely some wonkiness when it comes to Tidal Surge with its knockback and the puddle. Sometimes enemies will fall into the puddle. Sometimes they'll get knocked back. Sometimes if I drop in through it, if I drop in through them like this, oh, I ran out again. I should probably put on more energy, but I kind of wanted to not have any mods in. Forgive me for that, please. But let's go ahead and jump back over here. And what we'll do is we're going to just drop here, and then I'm going to try to dash through them again. And okay, it looks like that's how. Oh, nope, I didn't get. Oh, I did get one of them. So I did end up actually picking up one, but the other two got pushed back. So as you can see, there's a lot of inconsistencies with this skill when you're using Tidal Surge. Another inconsistency that you have is when you use the pull version of the skill. So let's go ahead and do that now. So if I drop into a puddle, a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to pull people. Now, if I pull this guy and I dash away, you're going to see I don't bring him with me. Right? So if I take it like this, I pull him, I move around a little bit, right? So I definitely have him in my puddle, right? He's in there, and then I dash, it still doesn't bring him in. So the only way that they get basically pulled with you is if you are dropping into a puddle when they are already in there, or if you're over here and, like, let's say the enemies are unfrozen with their AI and they run into your puddle. If you use your tentacle to pull them, or you use your dash ability to jump on top of them, which I ran out of energy, it will not pull them with you when you do your title search. This is really important when you're trying to traverse the map, and it's probably, if you've played this guy for any amount of time and tried using Undertow, it's why you're seeing such inconsistent results. Now, that isn't as far as this ability goes with its kind of weird wonkiness. So what we're going to look at now is, if we look at the card again, we have two range stats, right? We have two range stats. We have radius and grab range. So going into that, I'm going to grab some range here. And I'm going to just get a bunch of range. Then I'm going to go to abilities again, and we're going to look at the card. So as you can see, the radius did not get increased by 90%. It's nowhere close to that. It's more like 30%, right? So the radius increase for the puddle itself, for some reason they decided to do this. They decided like the puddle shouldn't get that much bigger. So I believe it's the square root of whatever it should be. I think that's how it works. So it's a non-linear increase. What that means is basically the more you put into it, the less you get out of it. So modding for ability range to get your puddle size up is not going to be super effective. That doesn't mean ability range is bad on Undertow or that it's bad for Hydroid as a whole. It just means it's bad for the puddle size. Now, if we look at the grab range at the bottom there, our grab range is very respectable at 15 meters, and 28 meters is nothing to scoff at. We can pull enemies from very, very far away, and this is actually a really great utilization of the skill, right? If we can grab, you know, dangerous enemies like bombards or heavy gunners or things like that, we can just grab them and pull them in. When they're in your puddle, they literally can't attack you. They literally can't do anything. The only type of enemy that is, well, there's two types of enemies that are going to be a problem for Undertow. That is enemies that can't really be CC'd or moved at all. They can't be sunk by the puddle. These are your boss type enemies. And then enemies that are Augments. Augments enemies constantly drain your energy. If you pull them into your puddle, their aura is still active and they will drain you extremely fast. You're going to have to pop out of your puddle, find where you pulled them in, and then kill them. So just keep in mind, Augments and boss type enemies aren't really going to interact with your Undertow that much. Now, from here, we are going to look at a different kind of weird set of stats, and we're going to look at efficiency. So let me grab efficiency. Let's see. We're going to start with the little one, Streamline. Here we go. And we're going to look at how it interacts with our skills. So you can see the drain goes down probably about as much as you'd expect. The grab energy, same. Energy per second, the same. However, the distance energy is a little bit different, right? So instead of getting a 30% increase, because it's reversed, we actually get a lot more value out of our percentage than it would seem like. So our distance, instead of every 0.2 meters costing us energy, it's going to be every 0.29 meters, basically every 0.3. So that 30% increase we got is actually effectively a 50% increase for our distance energy. Now, if we use the duration upgrade, or the duration negative, so that would be fleeting expertise. This increases our efficiency but lowers our duration. It's going to have an interesting interaction. So when we look at it, as expected, our energy per second, because that is affected by duration and efficiency, becomes unchanged. Plus 60%, minus 60%, it just doesn't change it at all. However, our initial drain is very, very low. It's not super high to begin with. Our grab is very efficient. We can grab 2.5 times more enemies. We went from 2 to 5, and our distance traveled again is also 2.5 times that amount. So instead of every 0.2 meters, it's every 0.5 meters. Now, that's not to say that losing a bunch of duration is good overall. Just like everything else, you're going to have to weigh the cost-benefit analysis and say, hey, do I care that my tentacle swarm or that my barrage lasts less duration? Those are all things that you're going to have to figure out. Your tidal surge is going to be affected by this. The speed, because you have lower duration, that speed is affected by your duration. So keep in mind, Undertow is really, really good with losing duration. Your other abilities are not. So just keep that in mind. It's something to keep in the back of your head when you're designing your builds. So now that we've kind of gotten through um, our efficiency and our range, let's talk about strength. So this ability does 25 base damage and then 2% per second. I'm going to go ahead and run and grab an Excel sheet. If you don't like Excel sheets, if you don't like numbers, I'm trying to keep this to a minimum, guys. And I know it's not super professional looking and everything, but I'm not an artist, I'm not a digital designer or anything, so this is about as good as I can do for right now at least, so just bear with me. So our damage per second right here is if we have no percentage increase for strength, and then this column is if we do have a percentage increase for strength. Now notice we do 2% and then 4%, 6%, 8%. This is total health damage every second. So the fourth tick will always deal 8% of an enemy's total health, barring armor. Armor is a whole different story. That does get reduced. Alright? However, this I've chosen not to include the flat amount of damage because even if it is per second at high levels, it isn't going to matter. And using a percentage based health skill versus low level enemies where you could kill them with an unmodded weapon is not good either, right? So this only really matters against very high level enemies that aren't armored, because you're probably not going to use it against armored enemies anyway, and you're not going to be using it against low level enemies that you could just melee to death with like anything. So this red line is where we would normally kill an enemy. So it's going to take 10 total ticks. This is the point at which you go from 90% of their total health to 110%. Now if you add 40% strength, that jumps up to your 8th tick. Now if I come in here and instead of doing 40%, let's say I do, I don't know, 100% bonus strength, right? And we say times 2 instead of times 1.4. And then we drag this right back out. We're talking about, lowering this to the 7th tick. And if you got even more, you could probably get it down to the 6th tick. The idea here, though, is the fact that because it's a stacking buff, right? Because it stacks every second, you're never going to get this down to a skill that can kill an enemy in 2 seconds, right? It'll never be that strong. You would have to get to 33% base damage on your first tick. So I would say a little bit of strength goes a long way to get like a few seconds less of hitting an enemy. But after that, it's going to get really, really hard to improve your kill speed with this skill. Now that kind of covers what strength does for this skill. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this skill interacts with other things. So we've already kind of looked at how it interacts with Tidal Surge. Tempest Barrage, it reacts exactly like you would normally think, but we can go ahead and do a little test on that. And what we're going to do is we're going to have these chargers right here. I'm going to drop into my puddle. They're going to be here. And then I'm going to, oops, sorry about that. Then I'm going to charge up my blast and I'm going to shoot. Now, these shots are going to come in randomly. You can see that they're over there. But lowering our damage, our range, is going to help focus the fire inside our puddle, right? So lowering range may actually help with corroding barrage setups where you're trying to really lower armor. Now that being said, and I know this isn't technically part of Undertow, but since they made their changes to corrosive procs, we're going to actually see that corroding barrage isn't super efficient, and I'm going to go ahead and show you that. So corroding barrage isn't going to be super effective. Alright, and that kind of sucks. Oh, I keep using the wrong ability. And this is just the base version, no mods, just the augment itself. So these are level 50s. He has 8 stacks and he's taken 90 damage from it. So as you can see, even though he has like those stacks, we're not really doing that much damage, and these are only level 50s. So just keep in mind, corroding barrage is vastly nerfed over what it used to be. It isn't really going to help you that much. You'd be much better off trying to proc something else with corrosive, like a weapon procking corrosive, getting them to the maximum stacks, and then sinking them in to get some burst damage going. But because of the fact that corrosive now falls off, and the fact that your puddle has to ramp up, it's going to make it really, really hard to kill armored enemies with your puddle. Um, so that's kind of how your barrage interacts. Now, it's basically nerfed into the ground at high level against armored enemies. It's just never going to be worth it. Now, how does it interact with its other ability, Tentacle Swarm? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to make sure I have no mods on, and we're going to take a look at something. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sink into my puddle, and then I'm going to summon a fully charged Tentacle Swarm. Now, it doesn't matter if I aim it over there. It's always going to spawn on my location. So you're going to see all these tentacles kind of spawning over here. Right, so you see, and they're all inside my puddle. Now if I move, they don't move with me, but they all have spawned inside my puddle. So it makes your tentacle spawns very, very concentrated. You're going to be able to hold tight corridors with this. Additionally, let me go ahead and spawn some more enemies. If I use my Tempest Barrage, my Tentacle Swarm normally, right, I'm going to pick up some enemies, and they're going to take, what is that, 200 damage per second. Now, if I were to sink into my puddle and cast again, hopefully I can get it off, you're going to see they're taking 400 damage. So Tentacle Swarm doubles its damage if it is cast inside of your puddle. So that is very, very good for farming builds. And generally farming builds are going to do like lower to medium level missions for a very long time just to get, credits or whatever specific, planet materials you're going after, things like that. So just keep in mind, it does double your Tentacle Swarm's damage. The biggest probably advantage to using this skill is actually not anything that it really does to an enemy, but what it does for you, and we're going to look at that now. So recently they added shield gating into the game, right? So effectively, whenever an enemy hits you and you have shields left, your health can't be touched for that hit. So it doesn't matter if you get dealt 10 million damage, you take whatever remaining shields you have left. So this is really great because when you drop into your puddle, you actually become invincible for a short amount of time, and then your shield can start regenning, and you come back out, and when the enemy hits you again, they can start obviously working on your shield, but when they get to that 300, that health amount, you have time to react, and you can drop in and get a little bit of shield left so you can take that one more hit at high levels. So effectively, this skill is going to allow you to shield gate very effectively. Now, enemies can burn through you very quickly, especially when you have a lot of targets on you. So just be wary that this isn't a catch-all, but it does give you a little bit of time to reset. Additionally, along the defensive vein, if you ever touch an enemy, you can just literally like toggle it off and on, and they'll just drop on the ground every single time. And it's effectively, in that way, a really strong CC. But how good that's going to be at range, is gonna highly depend on who you're playing with and how much energy you have and a lot of stuff like that. So you have tons of CC in general on this guy, but if you are swarmed, like if there's infested all over you and you're about to get killed from melee attackers, it is extremely good at playing defense. So overall, the skill is very, very strong defensively. You just need to have a little bit of efficiency to make it a very reliable choice. Moving on, we have the Augment. So the Augment is not super great. So if we come in here, we go to Curative Undertow. Now this thing heals allies for 30% every 1.5 seconds, and it will also heal us every 1.5 seconds for 10%. Now that isn't listed, but it does heal us as well for 10% of our maximum HP. I could cover it more in detail, but some of the stats don't work with these, and that's pretty common for augments. Like I don't believe efficiency works for the energy cost for this thing, because it's not technically us, it's the augment. It's kind of weird like that sometimes in Warframe. But other than that, it's really kind of bad. I could only ever see it being good for like super high health warframes and being a support for them, like an Inaros or something, but I don't think that's super viable. I don't think this is worth a slot, but I think that's going to cover it for this video, guys. If you have anything to add, please let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.